In recent years, Jehovah's Witnesses have accelerated the sale of kingdom halls and large assembly centers dedicated to Jehovah. The organization justifies these sales as strategic reallocation, but public documents, real estate records, and municipal statements reveal a movement on a global scale, transforming religious properties into high-value real estate assets. This isn't simply about selling a few unused buildings. What we're witnessing is a systematic conversion of properties that were built with volunteer labor, financed through donations from ordinary members, and solemnly dedicated as belonging to God Himself. These buildings, once presented as permanent houses of worship, are now appearing on commercial real estate listings, being sold to municipalities, developers, and private investors. The proceeds from these sales flow directly to the organization's corporate entities, while the communities that built and maintained these properties often have no say in the decision and receive no financial compensation. The pattern raises fundamental questions about ownership, transparency, and the relationship between religious dedication and corporate asset management. When a building is declared to belong to God during its dedication ceremony, can it later be sold like any other commercial property? And if it can, what does that tell us about the nature of religious property ownership within this organization? The practice is not isolated. Countries across Europe, North America, and Latin America are recording dozens of transactions involving properties belonging to the world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses. During dedication speeches, it is affirmed that the buildings belong to Jehovah. In legal practice, however, all property titles are registered in the name of the organization's corporations, which subsequently carry out the sales. From Brooklyn to London, from Sao Paulo to Sydney, the same pattern emerges. Large assembly halls that once hosted thousands of believers are being listed for sale. Kingdom halls where families worshipped for generations are being converted into apartments, offices, or commercial spaces. In some cases, entire complexes spanning multiple city blocks have been sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. The organization maintains detailed corporate structures specifically designed to hold these properties. In the United States, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania serves as the primary holding entity. In other countries, similar corporate structures exist, all ultimately controlled by the governing body in Warwick, New York. This legal architecture allows for centralized decision-making about property sales, regardless of local congregation wishes or involvement. What makes this pattern particularly noteworthy is its acceleration. While the organization has always bought and sold some properties as part of normal operations, the current pace is unprecedented. Dozens of kingdom halls are being sold annually in some countries. Major assembly halls that served entire regions for decades are being liquidated. The Brooklyn headquarters complex, once the spiritual and administrative heart of the organization, was sold in a series of transactions totaling over $1 billion. This raises a recurring question: to whom does the property actually belong, to the religious community or to the administrative corporation? The answer, according to legal documents, is clear. The corporation owns everything. But the theological and ethical implications of this arrangement are far more complex. The Trap Camp Convention Center, built in the 1970s, became one of the largest complexes of Jehovah's Witnesses in Germany. The site comprised approximately 20,000 square meters, including a main hall with capacity for over 2,000 people, lodging facilities, administrative offices, industrial kitchens, and extensive green areas. The construction story of Trap Camp is typical of how Jehovah's Witnesses build their facilities. Thousands of volunteers donated their time, skills, and labor. Carpenters, electricians, plumbers, and general laborers took vacation days from their regular jobs to work on the project. Families contributed their savings, believing they were building something permanent, something that would serve future generations of believers. Local congregations organized fundraising efforts, with members donating regularly to cover construction costs. The complex was not just a building, it represented decades of collective effort and sacrifice. For many German witnesses, attending conventions at Trap Camp was a highlight of their spiritual calendar. Families would travel from across the region, some staying in the on-site lodging, others camping nearby. The facility hosted baptisms, where new members made their dedication to God. It was the venue for major announcements from the organization's leadership. Friendships were formed, marriages began, and spiritual experiences were shared within those walls. The site was designed for longevity. The construction quality was high, built to last for generations. The grounds were meticulously maintained by volunteers who took pride in keeping everything in pristine condition. This was not a temporary structure or a facility expected to have a limited lifespan. Everything about trap camp suggested permanence, a physical manifestation of the organization's claim to be God's eternal people on earth. In 2025, the organization sold the land and buildings to the Municipal Council of Trap Camp. The council president, Harold Krill, described the deal as a stroke of luck, due to the size and strategic location of the property. The sale happened quickly and quietly. Local congregations that had used the facility for decades received notification that Trap Camp had been sold. There was no consultation with these congregations, no vote, no opportunity to discuss alternatives. The decision had been made by the organization's leadership, and local members simply had to accept it. For the municipal council, acquiring such a large, well-maintained property in a strategic location was indeed fortunate. The infrastructure was already in place: parking areas, utility connections, accessibility features, and substantial buildings in good condition. From a municipal planning perspective, it was an ideal acquisition. But for many witnesses who had invested their time, money, and emotional energy into building and maintaining Trap Camp, the news was shocking. Some had worked on the original construction. Others had spent every summer volunteering to maintain the grounds. Families had generational memories connected to the site. And now, with a single corporate decision, it was gone, sold to the government for purposes that had nothing to do with worship. The financial details of the transaction were not disclosed to congregation members. They were not told how much money the organization received, how those funds would be used, or whether any portion would be allocated to building new facilities in the region. The entire process operated with the opacity typical of corporate transactions, not the transparency one might expect from a religious community. According to official publications from the council, the site will be converted into up to 100 residential apartments, new offices and commercial areas, and multipurpose public spaces. The former assembly hall will be adapted as a large cultural center, intended for public events, fairs, concerts, political meetings, and exhibitions. Think about the transformation that represents. A building where prayers were offered, where biblical instruction was given, where people made solemn dedications to God, will now host rock concerts, political rallies, and commercial trade shows. The spaces where baptisms occurred might become corporate offices. The kitchens that prepared meals for volunteers might serve a commercial cafeteria. The grounds where families picnicked between convention sessions could become apartment balconies. In other words, an installation previously classified as dedicated to the worship of Jehovah will now be operated as a public and commercial structure. The sacred has been converted to the secular. The dedicated has been repurposed. And all of this happened through a business transaction, with the religious organization acting as seller and the municipal government as buyer. From the municipality's perspective, this is urban development and efficient use of space. From a religious perspective, however, it represents something more troubling: the commodification of what was supposedly given to God. The contradiction is stark and unavoidable. Dedication speeches affirm that such buildings belong to Jehovah and are forever dedicated to his service. However, real estate documentation reveals an administrative model in which congregations finance, build, and maintain the location, but legal ownership is registered in the name of the religion's corporate entities, and in case of sale, the entire transaction value is received by the headquarters. This creates a discrepancy between religious discourse and administrative practice. During dedication ceremonies, speakers declare that the property now belongs to God and will serve his purposes in perpetuity. These are solemn occasions, often featuring prayers that specifically dedicate the building to divine service. The language used is absolute and permanent. There is no mention of conditional dedication, no acknowledgement that the building might later be sold, no suggestion that dedicated to Jehovah actually means owned by a corporation that can liquidate the asset when convenient. Members donate believing their contributions are funding permanent religious infrastructure. They volunteer their labor under the understanding that they're building something lasting. They develop emotional and spiritual attachments to these buildings, viewing them as sacred spaces. Yet the legal reality is entirely different. The corporation that holds the title can sell the property at any time, for any reason, without consulting the people who built it or donated toward it. A reference frequently raised in theological discussions is Leviticus chapter 27, verse 28. Nothing that a man devotes unconditionally to Jehovah can be sold or redeemed. The text contrasts with current practice, although the organization does not publicly comment on this tension. This biblical passage is specific and unambiguous. When something is devoted to God, it cannot be sold. It cannot be bought back. It is permanently removed from commercial use. Ancient Israelites understood this principle clearly. What was given to God stayed given to God. It didn't re-enter the marketplace. It wasn't converted back into personal or corporate assets. Yet modern practice within this organization operates on entirely different principles. Properties are dedicated with religious ceremony and then sold through corporate transactions. The biblical language of permanent devotion is maintained in speeches, but the legal and financial reality follows corporate property law, not ancient Israelite religious principles. The organization has never directly addressed this contradiction. There are no official publications explaining how selling dedicated properties aligns with biblical texts about permanent devotion. The policy is simply implemented, and members are expected to accept it without question. Those who raise concerns are often viewed as lacking faith or causing division. Experts who study the organizational structure of Jehovah's Witnesses commonly point to several factors behind the increasing number of property sales worldwide. One key factor is logistical restructuring. Large regional conventions have been reduced or eliminated as the organization shifts toward online events. Content that once required thousands of people to gather in massive facilities is now streamed digitally, watched in smaller kingdom halls or even at home. As a result, large assembly complexes like Trap Camp no longer serve their original purpose, making their liquidation strategically logical. Another factor is the rising cost of maintenance. Facilities built in the 1970s and 1980s have become expensive to operate. Aging infrastructure demands continuous repairs. Heating and cooling enormous buildings consume significant resources. Roof replacements, plumbing updates, electrical system upgrades, all of these accumulate into substantial long-term costs. For an organization focused on financial efficiency, keeping underused facilities becomes increasingly difficult to justify. A third factor is the shift toward a centralized real estate strategy. The international headquarters has consolidated its property portfolio, favoring smaller, more adaptable, and more financially efficient buildings. The trend is toward merging congregations and reducing the number of independently operated kingdom halls. Fewer, larger facilities allow tighter financial control, lower maintenance expenses, and more efficient allocation of resources. The situation in Germany reflects all of these global trends. Trap Camp was large, costly to maintain, and progressively underutilized as conventions moved online. From a corporate efficiency standpoint, selling the complex makes perfect sense. However, this logic creates a tension with the theological claims made during its dedication. If a building is declared to belong to God, can it truly become redundant? And can a sacred space be evaluated purely through a financial cost-benefit analysis? The change brings practical implications. The local community loses a central meeting point. The space passes to municipal government control. Historical records, archives, and memories of assemblies are removed from the location. Urban reconfiguration replaces religious function with public or commercial use. For witnesses in the region, the loss is more than just logistical. Trap Camp was part of their religious identity. It was where they experienced spiritual highs, where they formed lasting friendships, where their children were baptized. These memories don't simply transfer to a new location. The physical space held meaning beyond its functional purpose. There's also a psychological impact. When members are told that buildings dedicated to God can be sold like any other real estate, it inevitably affects how they view the organization's claims about divine backing and eternal permanence. If a building can be dedicated to God and then sold to a municipal government, what does that say about the nature of dedication? What does it mean to give something to God if God's representatives can later decide to monetize it? In administrative terms, the transaction represents the transformation of a religious asset into a financial asset. This is not unique to Jehovah's Witnesses. Many religious organizations manage property portfolios and make strategic decisions about buying and selling. But the particular theological claims made by this organization about dedication and divine ownership create a specific tension that other groups may not face. The sale of Trap Camp is not an isolated event but part of a systematic movement of real estate divestment. The investigation shows a clear duality between what is affirmed in speeches, property of Jehovah, and what occurs in practice, corporate property with market value. With the transformation of the complex into apartments, offices, and a large cultural center, an inevitable question emerges, not emotional but logical. What actually defines ownership, religious dedication or corporate registration? The answer, legally, is obvious. Corporate registration determines ownership. The organization's corporate entities hold legal title, and they can dispose of properties as they see fit. But the theological and ethical question remains unresolved. If buildings are truly given to God, can they be taken back and sold? If dedication is permanent, how can dedicated properties be repurposed for secular use? This investigation doesn't attempt to answer these questions definitively. But it does reveal the scale and pattern of property sales, the contradiction between religious discourse and corporate practice, and the impact on communities that built and maintained these facilities. The case of Trap Camp in Germany is just one example of a global phenomenon that shows no signs of slowing down. As more kingdom halls and assembly centers are sold, the tension between theological claims and corporate reality will only become more apparent.